Hello, and welcome to another video from TRiO Student Support Services at Santa Fe Community College. Today we're going to talk about study habits for success in college and beyond. First question, do you study? Think about what this means. Do you have a plan when you study? Do you approach things with some sort of system or organization? If not, you might want to consider one, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Take a few moments to consider these questions. Where do you study? When do you study? What study methods do you use? Are these methods effective? How might studying for a college course differ from previous experiences you've had? And what's your goal when you study? Now consider these questions as you start to build better study habits. Who do you study with? Do you study with people who are supportive of your study style? What do you study? Do you study only what you highlight in a book, or do you look for other resources? Where do you study? Do you choose a place that you can be productive and get a lot done? Why do you study? What's your motivation for studying? And when do you study? And of course, for how long? And what methods do you employ? Well, let's start with the first question. Who do you study with? Group study can be very valuable. You can gain support from fellow students. You can get notes when you miss a class, or you can see a fellow student's notes to get a different perspective if you missed something or didn't quite get what the instructor was saying. It's also a tutoring opportunity for you to teach others and for others to teach you to play to your collective strengths. Showing others builds confidence. I'll never forget my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Strawman, said, "If you show it, you know it," and that really stuck with me. And working independently can be more productive once you know the material. So while study groups are important and they're an excellent way for you to learn material, once you know that material, you really want to master it on your own so that you're personally confident because you're the only one who can take the test. What you want to do is avoid studying with people who aren't as motivated as you are. Now let's talk about what do you study? Well, studying your notes is important, but studying your book is also important. And likewise, a review from an instructor is important. Let's talk about these three. Well, your book, you should be reading as you go. So that way you're learning as you go and you're highlighting important information and putting that information in your notes. So that way your notes sort of become this distilled, concentrated version of what's in your book, but it's in your own words. And this is really important if you want to really remember things, especially when you're under pressure. A review from your instructor is a very valuable resource because it's very likely that the questions on a test or exam will come directly from the review or similar style questions. And you'll have an insight not only into what questions the instructor will be asking, but what kinds of questions and in what format. That way you can be really prepared. Where you study plays an important role in how well you're able to concentrate and retain information. For example, consider this learning center set in a library location. Now compare that to this nightclub on the left. Which one do you think is a more effective study location? Well, if you said the learning center on the right, you're probably right. Now, this might seem like an exaggeration, but when we're home and there are so many demands on our time, or when we're in a loud coffee shop, sometimes it can feel as if we're not being very productive. And that's why libraries and learning centers are great places to go. Often, we can get support when we need it, and it's a nice, quiet place full of resources. Now, you might prefer having a study buddy, or you might prefer reading out underneath a tree, or, as we all have to sometimes when we're sick, curl up on the couch and study. You need to find a location that represents your quiet place of concentration that's free from distractions. Why do you study? Consider your motivations. Is it because you have to? I bet it's because you want future knowledge and opportunities that come with success in college. Consider writing down your reasons and motivations and put that somewhere visible. The more specific your goal, the more motivating it will be. When do you study? Consider the time of day, but more importantly, consider whether you're leaving enough time. As this comic points out, time management is the key. If you don't leave enough time to get all the work done, then it'll feel as if you've run out of time and you'll feel like you have to cram. But if you just do a little bit every day, then you can make a significant impact in how much you have to study. So how much time should you be studying per week? Well, the recommendation is to study for at least 2 hours for every credit hour you're taking. Maybe more, maybe less, depending on the class. So if you're taking 15 credit hours, you should plan to study for about 30 hours per week. Including class time, this is 45 hours, more than a full-time job, so it needs to go into your schedule. How long should you study at a time? Well, you might study for several hours at a time. This can be unproductive, though, because after a few hours, your brain is worn out, and you can actually undo some of the learning that has been taking place. You could also study for 10-minute chunks, but maybe this isn't long enough to see how everything fits together. Could you study all night? Well, sure, but this probably won't do you any good in terms of retaining the information to use on a test later. What should you do? Well, you'll have to find what's right for you, but one thing that I recommend is to study a little bit every day and to set your timer for what are known as Pomodoro sessions. Maybe set your timer for 30 minutes. Turn off your phone, put away your laptop, turn off the TV, whatever you need to do to concentrate and focus for 30 minutes. And then at the end of 30 minutes, treat yourself. This is one way to do it. You need to set reasonable goals so that you can actually achieve them. And you also need to adapt how you study to the course material and your personal style. Well, how you study will develop as you go through college, but the course material will also change. And so you need to adapt your study technique to meet the needs of the course. For example, if I'm taking a poetry course, I might go and read a bunch of poetry and read it out loud and get feedback from my friends. If I'm studying for chemistry, then what I might do is make some flashcards of common chemical equations and use them to remember. You need to come up with a system that works for you. Here's one set of guidelines. If you interpret it into your own language and you apply it to something that you can understand in real life, you're more likely to retain it. There are two kinds of processing. There's shallow and deep processing. And there are two major methods for testing how your studying habits are being effective. One is self-testing, and the other is chunking. When you process information at a shallow level, it often involves repetition, maybe memorization. But this is hard to apply to new concepts and is not very useful on a test. Another technique that is often employed is mnemonics, where you use some letters or phrase to remember something. Well, some common examples are PEMDAS for the order of operations in mathematics, and fanboys for remembering where the comma goes after some fanboy or conjunction in English. Unfortunately, these don't tell the whole story and are often misleading. For example, with PEMDAS, it appears as though multiplication comes before division because the M comes before the D. But in reality, in math, multiplication and division are inverse operations, and so they happen at the same time from left to right. This is the kind of depth that shallow processing won't show you. Only deep processing can show you that. Deep processing can be gained through rehearsal. This means practice explaining to others, being the teacher, or playing what-if scenarios. Well, what if the words of this question were changed? How would that change the process or the answer? Another is application. How can I apply what I'm learning to something new or something in the real world? They could be word problems or real-world problems. You can also use questions to quiz yourself and others to find out what you know and what you've mastered. And you can conceptualize big picture ideas by seeing how it all fits together through a map or some kind of narrative. Self-testing. Well, some different methods, the quiz, the summary, or you could teach someone else. Some different techniques, you could play a game that you make up based on what you're learning. You could create a song that uses some important terms you're studying. You could summarize the information to tell someone who's not studying that same material and see if you can explain it to them. You can role play. I'll be the teacher, you be the student, and after a few minutes, we'll trade places. This can be really useful. You can also look for opportunities to apply what you're learning and ask good questions that not only quiz yourself, but also question the what-ifs of learning more. Another important thing to do is to try to visualize whatever you're learning, whether that's how things fit together in the body through anatomy and physiology, or whether it's visualizing an equation on a scale in mathematics. And one of the most valuable things you can do to test yourself and see how you're learning is to teach someone else. Well, chunking is another good technique to make tasks manageable. What you want to do is break the information into digestible chunks by breaking chapters into subheadings and then summarizing those sections. One thing you can do with a math review is you can identify which problems come from which sections, and then you can look at each section at a time to see what you're learning and where you still need to practice. And you can write out the steps in math problems to see how you would articulate and explain what you're doing so that it's not just in your head. And these are really good ways to chunk things to make them manageable, but don't forget that when you chunk, you still need to bring it all back together and see the big picture. So ask yourself, where do you need the most help with your studying? Are you pulling all-nighters that are not resulting in the scores you want? Well, ask yourself these questions, the where, what, why, when, and how long and how of your studying to see where you could improve and better make use of your time. Staff at TRiO Student Support Services can help you do that. Thanks.